The human brain is an organ of prediction. Its primary goal is not happiness or comfort. Its goal is survival through efficiency. And one of the most efficient things the brain can do is automate behavior. But here's the catch. The brain doesn't differentiate between productive and unproductive patterns. It simply reinforces what you repeat. So if you live in ambiguity without clear direction, your brain wires itself for drift. It prioritizes reaction over creation. That's where most people live. Average is not a lack of talent. Average is the byproduct of an untrained mind chasing undefined outcomes. Clarity of direction isn't a motivational concept, it's a biological necessity. When you set a clear goal, especially one with emotionally charged meaning, you trigger a shift in your brain's neurochemical landscape. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation, begins to rise. Not just when you reach the goal, but when you orient toward it. This surge in dopamine sharpens your focus, enhances your energy, and increases your willingness to endure discomfort. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function, planning, and decision-making, becomes more active when you're working toward a specific, well-defined objective. This area orchestrates your attention, filters distractions, and helps you resist impulses that don't serve your mission. But this only happens when the mission is clear. If your direction is vague, your prefrontal cortex has nothing concrete to organize your energy around. You become susceptible to shiny object syndrome, emotional reactivity, and fatigue, not because you're weak, but because your neural circuitry is unaligned. Think of it like this. Your brain is a GPS system. If you don't plug in a destination, it can't optimize the route. It just keeps recalculating based on wherever you happen to drift next. But when you give your brain a target, something specific, time-bound, and meaningful, you engage what neuroscientists call the goal-directed network. This includes areas like the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the lateral prefrontal cortex, which regulate cognitive control and direct behavior toward long-term outcomes. These aren't philosophical ideas, they're biological realities. Here's the key. Clarity must be specific enough to engage these systems. I want to be rich is not clarity. I want to build a 6-figure consulting business by December 1st. With a focus on helping 100 clients improve their productivity is clarity. That level of detail activates sensory and motor systems in the brain, allowing you to visualize, simulate, and eventually manifest the behaviors required to achieve the result. There's also the phenomenon of attentional gating. Once the brain knows what to focus on, it begins filtering your sensory input for information that matches that goal. If you've ever decided to buy a certain kind of car and suddenly started seeing it everywhere, that's not a coincidence. It's your reticular activating system at work, a brainstem mechanism that filters noise and elevates relevance based on your priorities. So when your direction is clear, the world starts looking different. You begin to notice opportunities, patterns, and feedback loops that were invisible before. From a metabolic standpoint, clarity conserves energy. Every decision costs glucose and oxygen. When you don't know what you're working toward, you burn cognitive fuel on uncertainty, second guessing, and unproductive loops. But when your direction is precise, decisions get easier. You simply ask, does this align with my mission? If yes, proceed. If no, drop it. This is how top performers avoid burnout, not by doing less, but by eliminating unnecessary internal dialogue. Clarity also improves your stress response. When challenges arise, and they will, a clear direction allows the brain to interpret stress as signal, not threat. This shifts the activation from the amygdala, which governs fear, to the anterior cingulate cortex, which governs adaptation and learning. In other words, stress becomes a sharpening tool instead of a breaking point. Ultimately, a lack of direction is not benign, it's dangerous. It allows the environment to hijack your neurobiology. You become a passenger instead of a driver. Your nervous system was built to respond to intention. When you don't provide it, the brain defaults to impulse, distraction, and doubt. But when you establish a clear, emotionally grounded direction, you engage the full machinery of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to adapt and rewire itself in real time. The single most underutilized tool for transformation isn't motivation, it's structure. People chase inspiration, waiting for the right moment to act, but the nervous system doesn't function optimally on randomness. It thrives on rhythm. Predictable routines, executed daily, don't just keep you disciplined, they recalibrate your brain and body for high performance. And the most successful people on the planet don't rely on willpower, they rely on protocols. A daily protocol is not a to-do list. It's not a plan or entry, it's a non-negotiable system. A sequence of actions designed to align your neurobiology with your long-term goals. These systems allow you to automate your progress. And once something is automated, it's no longer a decision, it's a reflex. That's where real power begins. Let's break it down from the level of the brain. Neurons that fire together, wire together. This isn't just a phrase, it's a literal map of how your habits get encoded in your nervous system. When you start your day with a set of structured behaviors, light exposure, movement, hydration, and focused intention, you send signals to your circadian clock, your stress systems, and your attentional networks that today has a mission. These early actions act as anchors for everything that follows. Consider light exposure first. Within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking, if you get direct sunlight into your eyes, ideally outside, you initiate a cascade of biological effects. Cortisol rises, not in a negative, stress-inducing way, but in a healthy pulse-like fashion that tells the body and brain to wake up, increase alertness, and start optimizing energy systems. Melatonin production is suppressed, which helps lock in your circadian rhythm. That one protocol alone, getting 5 to 10 minutes of sunlight early in the day, can improve mood, increase focus, and lead to deeper sleep 12 to 16 hours later. Movement is next. You don't need to run a marathon. Even 5 to 15 minutes of zone 2 cardiovascular activity or a basic mobility circuit can increase brain diverge neurotrophic factor, BDNF, often referred to as miracle grow for the brain. BDNF supports learning, memory, and mental clarity. When you move your body early, you literally turn on the parts of the brain that regulate mood, executive function, and decision-making. That's not discipline. That's biology doing its job when you support it with the right input. Then comes focused work, deep work. Ideally within 90 minutes after waking, engage in 60 to 90 minutes of uninterrupted, distraction-free effort toward a meaningful task. This taps into the brain's natural periods of heightened dopamine sensitivity. You're using the neurochemical environment that's already optimized for effort and learning. Repeating this kind of focused session daily conditions the brain to expect flow states, not by accident, but by design. You train your nervous system to associate mornings with progress, not procrastination. Stacking protocols like these creates what's known as a feed-forward loop, a cycle where one positive action reinforces the next. The early rhythm of sunlight, movement, hydration, and deep work isn't random. It's how you build momentum from the first hour of the day. When you repeat this rhythm daily, the brain starts predicting it. And prediction is what the brain loves most. It reduces uncertainty, increases energy efficiency, and stabilizes emotion. But protocols aren't just for the morning. Midday routines like strategic breaks, non-sleep deep rest, NSDR, or a short walk outdoors can reset dopamine levels, lower cortisol, and preserve cognitive function for the second half of the day. These aren't luxuries. They're essential resets that prevent burnout and extend your focus window. Evening protocols complete the loop. Dimming artificial lights, limiting screen exposure, and going through a predictable wind down process signals the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your brain's master clock, that it's time to shift into recovery. Sleep isn't just passive rest. It's where your brain consolidates learning, regulates emotional memories, and repairs tissue. A strong evening protocol directly improves your performance the next day. The mistake people make is assuming fortune comes from one big leap. It doesn't. It comes from dozens of small, intentional actions repeated with consistency. These actions don't feel like breakthroughs, but they are. They trigger long-term potentiation in the brain, strengthen synaptic connections, and literally reshape your identity at the level of the nervous system. Over time, what once required effort becomes effortless. You go from trying to live like a high performer to being one by default. And the only way that happens is through protocol-driven repetition. Most people misunderstand stress. They view it as a problem to be avoided, a weakness to be suppressed, or a flaw in their system. But stress, at its core, is not the enemy. It's information. It's a biological signal telling you something important, that your system is being challenged, pushed, or stretched beyond its current capacity. And that's not a flaw. That's a feature. Stress, when properly framed and harnessed, becomes one of the most powerful tools for growth, performance, and mental clarity. The human brain and body are built to adapt. That's the essence of neuroplasticity. And adaptation only happens when we introduce friction, something that forces our system to recalibrate, to become more efficient, more focused, more resilient. Stress is that friction. Without it, there's no signal to change. There's no reason for your nervous system to rewire itself. But when stress is purposeful and time-bound, when it comes in response to a challenge you've chosen, it transforms from something that drains you into something that trains you. Let's talk biology. The moment your brain perceives a challenge, whether it's a cold shower, a public speech, or a financial deadline, it activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis. This system floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline, two of the primary stress hormones. These chemicals raise your heart rate, increase blood flow to the muscles, sharpen your focus, and put your body into a state of readiness. Your pupils dilate, your reaction time improves, your brain shifts from default mode to goal-directed thinking. These aren't signs of breakdown, they're signs of activation. This is your body preparing you to meet the moment. But context is everything. If stress is chronic and uncontrollable, if you're in a constant loop of uncertainty with no sense of agency, it becomes toxic. It starts to suppress the immune system, damage memory centers in the hippocampus, and exhaust your energy. But when stress is voluntary and intermittent, the story changes. Voluntary stress, like a high-intensity workout, ice bath, public speaking, or waking up at 5 a.m. to work on your vision, trains your system to respond, not react. That type of stress inoculates you against fear, fatigue, and emotional volatility. This is the foundation of what neuroscientists call stress resilience, your ability to handle more without breaking down. Every time you expose yourself to a controlled dose of discomfort, your brain updates its calibration. You increase the threshold at which your body interprets a situation as too much. You build new neural pathways that associate difficulty with growth rather than danger. You become harder to shake, mentally and physically. Another powerful concept is stress modulation through breath. The breath is the only system in the body that is both automatic and under conscious control. When you learn to manipulate your breath during high stress states through physiological sighs, box breathing, or extended exhales, you send a signal to the brainstem that says, "We are safe, we are in control." This interrupts the sympathetic spike and engages the parasympathetic nervous system. You don't remove the stress, you regulate your response to it. That distinction is everything. The most elite performers, whether they're CEOs, athletes, special forces, or creatives, don't avoid stress. They dose it. They build it into their routines like training weight. They expose themselves to hard things on purpose so that the unexpected no longer rattles them. They understand that the mind and body respond to stress the same way they respond to resistance in the gym, with adaptation if the load is appropriate and the recovery is respected. Even mental stress like overwhelm or fear can be reframed. The amygdala, which processes emotional responses, communicates heavily with the prefrontal cortex. If you label the stress, "This is hard, but I can handle it," instead of avoiding it or suppressing it, you activate cognitive control networks. That alone reduces the emotional intensity. Naming the stress reduces its grip. Stress also boosts memory formation and learning. Elevated cortisol levels during a challenge increase the likelihood that the brain will store the experience. This is why you often remember emotionally charged events vividly. The nervous system flags stress as important. So if you learn how to pair stress with intentional action, you encode powerful lessons that stay with you. Dopamine is not about pleasure, it's about pursuit. It's the neurochemical that drives motivation, effort, craving, and reward anticipation. It doesn't spike just when you get the thing you want. It rises when you move toward it. That's why understanding how dopamine works and how modern life hijacks it is critical if you want to move from average to high performance. Most people are not underperforming because they lack goals. They're stuck in invisible dopamine feedback loops, reward cycles created by cheap hits of stimulation that rob the nervous system of focus, resilience, and long-term drive. Every time you scroll, swipe, check your notifications, or chase novelty on demand, you engage in a form of self-reward. These microstimuli release small amounts of dopamine, and the brain learns to anticipate them. Over time, it begins to favor them. The cost? Your baseline dopamine levels begin to fall. This means you need more stimulation to feel motivated, and you become less sensitive to the natural dopamine spikes that come from real work, deep focus, skill building, meaningful progress. This isn't psychological, it's chemical. The brain operates on a principle called homeostasis. If it experiences repeated spikes in dopamine, it compensates by reducing the number of dopamine receptors or limiting the release of dopamine over time. This is what's known as dopamine downregulation. The result, the same behavior that once gave you a boost now leaves you feeling flat, distracted, and unmotivated. And because these loops are subtle, most people don't realize they've trained their brains to expect constant input, constant novelty, and instant reward. The most dangerous part is this: modern distractions are engineered for this exact outcome. Social media platforms, short-form videos, clickbait headlines, and even constant multitasking are all designed to exploit your brain's reward circuitry. You're not failing because you're lazy. You're operating in an environment that conditions your nervous system to seek pleasure over progress. To break out of this loop, you have to stop thinking of dopamine as the problem and start seeing it as a system that needs recalibration. The goal is not to eliminate dopamine, it's to reset your sensitivity to it so that effort itself becomes rewarding again. The first step is dopamine fasting, not in the extreme sense of avoiding all stimulation, but in the practical sense of delaying or reducing passive dopamine hits throughout the day. This means setting boundaries with your phone, avoiding immediate stimulation upon waking, and resisting the urge to fill every quiet moment with a hit of... When you allow space for boredom, you allow your baseline dopamine levels to normalize. You allow your brain to reset its reward system so it can reassign value to hard things, things that actually move your life forward. Next, introduce effort-driven dopamine into your routine. This is dopamine that's earned, not given. When you engage in deep work, physical training, skill learning, or meaningful conversations, your brain still releases dopamine, but now the reward is tied to challenge and progress. And when you start associating dopamine with effort instead of ease, everything changes. You build a stronger relationship with discomfort. You find satisfaction in repetition. You stop chasing stimulation and start chasing excellence. One powerful practice is to delay gratification deliberately. If you finish a focused work session, wait before checking your phone. If you train hard in the gym, skip the post-workout scroll. These micro delays teach the brain that the reward isn't external, it's internal. You begin to experience satisfaction not from checking out, but from checking in with your own output. That's how you condition the nervous system to crave discipline. There's also the concept of dopamine layering, which is what happens when you stack multiple dopamine-producing activities at once, like listening to music, scrolling social media, and snacking. These layers artificially elevate dopamine, and when they're removed, baseline motivation drops even lower. Avoid stacking, let hard work stand alone, let rest be quiet. Let rewards be earned. The nervous system thrives on clarity and consistency. When your dopamine system is aligned with your values, your goals, and your habits, you don't need tricks to stay motivated. You don't need hype. You have a stable internal reward system that makes the hard path sustainable. The human brain is inherently social. You are not wired to function in isolation. From the structure of your mirror neurons to the chemistry of oxytocin and dopamine, your nervous system is constantly scanning, absorbing, and responding to the people around you. This means your environment is not neutral. It's shaping you every day. And if you want to move from average to fortune, one of the most decisive shifts you can make is to curate your proximity. You must surround yourself with energy, not excuses. Here's what the science says. The behaviors, moods, and even the belief systems of people you interact with regularly begin to rewire your brain. This is not metaphor, it's measurable. When you spend time around individuals who are driven, disciplined, and growth-oriented, your brain responds by adjusting its expectations and stress thresholds to match. Their energy raises your standard. Their urgency elevates your focus. And their intolerance for mediocrity becomes contagious. This is called emotional and behavioral entrainment. And it's one of the fastest ways to shift your identity and output. The opposite is also true. When you surround yourself with people who normalize delay, who justify failure, who complain instead of creating, you begin to internalize that worldview. Your dopamine system flattens, your ambition starts to shrink, and your tolerance for discomfort weakens. You don't even notice it happening because the nervous system adjusts incrementally. That's how average environments maintain average outcomes. It's not usually due to lack of intelligence or talent. It's due to the normalization of low standards. The people you're around act like tuning forks for your nervous system. Their posture, their language, their emotional tone, it all sends data to your brain consciously and unconsciously. And your mirror neuron system, the network responsible for empathy and imitation, begins to sync with that data. If you're surrounded by people who think 6/10 effort is enough, you start believing the same. If you're constantly around those who default to distraction, you start building the same neural grooves. But when you step into a room where intensity is expected, where people are building, executing, and moving, your entire physiology adjusts. Your brain releases more norepinephrine associated with focus. Your body increases readiness. Your mindset becomes forward-leaning. This isn't a mindset trick. It's environmental neuroplasticity. The brain learns from what it sees repeated, especially when it's emotionally charged and socially reinforced. This is why proximity is power, not metaphorically, biologically. The nervous system is designed to adapt to the tribe it believes it belongs to. So if your goal is to become exceptional. You must place yourself in a context where excellence is normal. That could be a mentor, a team, a community, or even a digital ecosystem. What matters is that the standards are higher than yours, that the people around you expect more of themselves and of you, and that excuses don't survive in that environment because they're simply not echoed. It's important to understand that high energy people aren't just positive, they're deliberate. They don't tolerate low peripheral behaviors in themselves or others. Their energy comes from momentum, from clarity, from execution. When you spend time with people like that, you feel pulled forward, not in a way that burns you out, but in a way that demands you step up. Your system responds to that demand by upgrading. Your self-talk changes. Your attention sharpens. You begin asking better questions, solving problems faster, and acting with more precision. But here's the trade-off. You have to let go of the environments that keep you small. That might mean distancing yourself from relationships built on comfort instead of growth. It might mean spending less time in conversations that revolve around drama, gossip, or passive complaining. That doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you accountable. Because every minute you spend absorbing low energy signals is a minute you could be rewiring your system for strength, clarity, and execution. Energy is not just enthusiasm. It's direction, purpose, and intensity. When you immerse yourself in environments charged with that kind of energy, you begin to match it. Not because you're forcing it, but because your nervous system is designed to adapt to whatever it's immersed in. That's how you shift your baseline. That's how you recondition your brain for focus, resilience, and drive. You don't do it alone. You do it in proximity to those who live in the zone where excuses don't survive, and output is expected. Progress is not the result of blind effort. It's the outcome of deliberate iteration, tight feedback loops between action, awareness, and adjustment. Most people operate with a fragmented understanding of their own performance. They work hard but don't measure. They reflect occasionally, if at all. They rarely adjust with precision. This is not a matter of intelligence, it's a matter of systems. If you want to move from average to extraordinary, you need to treat your behavior like data. That means tracking what matters, reflecting without distortion, and adjusting with surgical intent. Let's start with tracking. The brain is a prediction machine. It thrives when it gets accurate feedback and declines when it's operating on ambiguity. When you track your habits, your behaviors, your emotional responses, and your results daily, you're not just observing. You're creating a neurological feedback loop. The act of measuring directs your attention, and wherever your attention goes, your energy follows. If you track your focus, you become more focused. If you track your output, your brain starts organizing itself around producing more of it. But this only works if you measure what matters. You don't need to track everything, only the actions directly tied to your desired outcome. If your goal is cognitive performance, track your sleep, your deep work sessions, your movement, your learning intervals. If your goal is building a business, track your key metrics, calls made, problem solved, assets built. Quantify your lead indicators, the behaviors you control, not just lag indicators like revenue or recognition. That distinction alone can unlock massive momentum. The next phase is reflection. Neuroscientifically, reflection activates the default mode network of the brain, which plays a key role in memory consolidation, self-assessment, and perspective taking. When you reflect with intention, daily or weekly, you're not just journaling, you're rewiring your neural circuitry to better detect patterns, extract lessons, and anticipate future obstacles. You begin to see what's working, what's not, and what needs to shift. Reflection creates clarity, and clarity conserves energy. The more clearly you see yourself, the less friction you experience in decision-making. But reflection must be honest. The brain has a strong bias towards self-preservation, which means it will naturally try to protect your self-preservation. Ask, what did I do well today? What distracted me? Where did I negotiate with myself? What did I avoid and why? When you begin to interrogate your own behavior with precision, you start pulling your blind spots into the light. That's the birthplace of change. Then comes adjustment. The step most people skip. Observation and insight are meaningless if they don't translate into action. Your brain is plastic. It responds to what you do, not what you know. Adjustment means you take what you tracked, what you learned, and you modify the system. You tweak your routines, your environment, your inputs, your protocols. Small shifts applied consistently compound into massive neurochemical and behavioral gains. The mistake is thinking change has to be radical. In truth, a 1% shift in behavior, repeated daily, rewires the nervous system far more powerfully than occasional overhauls. And the key word here is relentlessly, not emotionally, not when you feel like it, relentlessly. This isn't about being obsessed with self-optimization. It's about being aligned with how the human system evolves. The nervous system learns through feedback. The brain adapts through pattern recognition and error correction. The people who outperform over the long term aren't always the most gifted. They're the ones who track with clarity, reflect with honesty, and adjust without ego. They're iterative by nature. They treat their output like a living system that can always be refined. In neuroscience, this approach is known as adaptive calibration. It's how elite systems, biological or technological, stay efficient under changing conditions. The principle is simple. Detect the signal, discard the noise, and reconfigure quickly. That's how the most resilient organisms survive. That's how high performers operate. They don't get attached to any one version of their routine or strategy. They measure, they learn, and they evolve. When you bring this mindset to your daily life, whether it's training, business, creativity, or leadership, you begin to close the gap between action and insight. You stop operating reactively. You start building your trajectory intentionally. And when you do that every single day with precision, with urgency, and with emotional neutrality, you train your nervous system to expect growth as the default pattern.